All right, back into my ranting. What is the responsible thing to do if your dog does get pregnant? Okay, if you've really been irresponsible and you had, an intact female who either you didn't keep it, contained and supervised, and a male got in or she got out, or you have an intact male and you just were really, really clueless. I think that is part of education that breeders should be giving. Um, what is the situation in the world? What is your responsibility to not contribute to overpopulation? People kind of think of this when they think about humans. Like, okay, we know that most of the kids that are in the foster care system come from underprivileged families. Um, there is a reason why people are living in poverty, and it often has to do with low function of the prefrontal cortex, and that is basically like good impulse control, reasoning from cause to effect, understanding consequences. Those are all things that help you be successful in life. And if you're really kind of missing some of those faculties, you will suffer and just really kind of make lots of bad choices, which that can be, like poverty really is the result of making lots of bad choices, oftentimes. Lots of bad luck, lots of lack of resources, lack of a cushion. You don't have parents who are wealthy who can bail you out if something happens, or um, whatever. It's oftentimes like these savings accounts or investments that kind of offer a cushion that come from generational wealth, or above average abilities to come up with solutions and really solve problems. That is why an underprivileged person remains poor, is they don't have those things. And so accidental dog breeding happens much more often with dogs that are poorly bred. They were purchased for less money than a well-bred dog, and so they produce not well-balanced dogs who are then adopted by people who don't have a lot of resources, who don't train. The dogs are ruined, they're rehomed, they go into shelter, and the vicious cycle continues. So, um, what is the responsible thing to do after you've done the irresponsible thing and let your female dog get pregnant? People sometimes think, well, surrender them to a rescue. And that's great because it is showing that you're not trying to make money from your mistake. Um, but now you've put all that extra work onto a rescue to screen adopters, to do the vaccines and the deworming and the spay and neutering in place of a good spay and neuter contract and good screening. Um, Really good screening of pets will help you find those responsible people who won't intend to breed the dog, although there are always people who really get good at being deceptive about their intentions, um, and can kind of look like a really responsible pet owner because they say all the right things, but really they are, planning to breed the dog. And now, if you were only breeding really healthy and well balanced dogs, what is the issue with someone breeding them? Often it's because you want to make sure you're a gatekeeper for your breed, and you want to make sure they're being bred to standard, or you want to make sure that the person is ethical in the way they go about it, or you want to make sure the dogs aren't being mistreated and used for financial gain. And so I think that comes from really knowing the person and knowing what type of person they are. And if you have someone who's a really good person and they do end up wanting to breed the dog, what's the issue? Are you concerned with like competition? You want to make sure that you don't lose puppy buyers to someone you just sold a puppy to. Um, anyway, so going back to where most of these dogs come from, and the cycle that kind of contributes to them being the lower quality types of dogs. That means that surrendering them to a rescue creates more of a burden on the rescue. Although I will say this, puppies are a better source of revenue for a rescue than dogs that need medical attention, and elderly dogs that are in foster for a lot longer and need kind of a long-term foster care where they're having to provide food and medical care for the dog. So in that way, rescues actually view puppies being surrendered to them as like, okay, this is their bread and butter. This is what keeps them going and keeps them able to help the dog. So in that sense, rescues shouldn't be upset at all when people have oops litters. They should be quite happy, and they are. They're like, oh yay, another, litter of puppies. This is great. So not only do they actually want, people to have these oops litters and surrender them to them because they keep them able to help the older dogs. And without those puppies, I think that the cost would be too high, that nobody would want to adopt. They make more money, there's more profit margin on puppies than on older dogs. Although some of the old dogs will have already had their spay and neuter and shots, and so they don't cost any money to prepare for being adopted. Others do, and so they're having to be spayed and neutered and vaccinated, but they're also older, so they will take longer to rehome. So it all kind of averages out, and puppies are part of that really important average that keeps the overhead low in rescues. So rescues are happy to take puppies, but it actually kind of takes away the person's sense of responsibility because, okay, the rescue was happy to take the puppies. That was easy. I mean, it was fun. They got to keep the puppies for the first 8 weeks when they're really super easy, like the mom's doing all the work. They don't have to clean up after them or feed them. And so there's very little motivation for people to not do that over and over again. Then if they do the next, I guess, time-intensive thing, and they decide to go ahead and find homes for the dogs, oftentimes there is very little screening that goes on. I've called up people and asked about adopting dogs, and they're like, oh yeah, it's available. You want to come meet her? And if you have the money, it's like, oh, sure, drop the money, here's the dog. So there's very little screening that goes on. And even the screening that the rescues do, like I said, it's just really easy to lie. And they actually have lower standards, rescues and people who have these oops litters, because they just really want to make sure that they're not stuck with a dog. They don't have the money to keep the dogs that don't sell. So the next responsible thing would be to really spend a lot of time screening, maybe even pay to advertise, which I've done before, and have a contract that is enforceable. Really either have a lawyer or understand what makes a contract enforceable, and have it written up so that it really, really discourages people from breeding or whatever it is, from keeping the dogs in a way that they could get pregnant. Like, there should be fines and fees that the breeder can levy, and they should, require something to be able to track this person down if they change their number. So a lot of times people will just get first, last name, and a phone number, but most people have many, many people who share their first and last name, and phone numbers can be changed, addresses can be changed, they can even give you a false name and address. So I feel like an additional step is really important, is getting the driver's license, so you know what the first and last name is legally, and the social security card or number, so you can track that person if they move or try to evade you, finding and collecting fees from them, not following the contract. And there is a certain commitment that you have to do to follow up on those proof of spay and neuter, and actually calling so that the vet, to make sure that they didn't just give you a false document because they think that you're just not going to spend time following up on it. And I mean, they can just ghost you and refuse to give you anything when you ask for proof. So all of those have happened to me. with fostering cats. That's kind of where I've done a lot of my trial and error with contracts and with figuring out the screening process and figuring out what questions I need to ask and what seems to be too much, where people just lose interest, and what seems to be enough. But it is very, very time consuming to find good homes. That's the most time consuming thing that rescuing involves, and or breeding involves, is finding those really good homes. But it's the most important step to make sure that it's really being done ethically, to make sure the dogs do it. Why bring dogs into the world if you aren't going to ensure that they have good homes? And you have to have a buyback agreement that not only are you requiring them to return the dog to you, you're actually willing to buy back the dog for the fair market value. If they think that they could get, $400 for the dog, go ahead and let them try. Post that dog, see if they get any responders, and tell them you are going to screen these adopters. If they can't find anyone, you can give them a certain amount of time, then you'll go ahead and buy that dog. You'll offer them, something lower than if they weren't able to sell the dog for $400, maybe offer them $300. Offer them what you know that you can get the dog sold for. And then if you bring a dog into the world, you have to be committed to that dog for the rest of its life. Now, if, it turns out to be like really unhealthy or aggressive, then at your cost, you need to euthanize that dog, not just like pass it on to a rescue. Like, okay, I'm going to surrender this dog to a rescue and they'll find a home for it. No, it's your responsibility. So that's where I feel like if people would like realize more of the responsibility of it and realize how much work it is, there'd be a lot less people doing it. But I also wanted to point out that I think that there's a really good parallel to so the most ethical thing to do, if you've allowed your dog to get pregnant, is really take a look at and see if it has this dog been health tested. Does it have a temperament? Same with the mate. If you don't know the mate, then you should assume that the dog is probably not the best in health and not the best representation of its breed, or if it is a mixed breed, it's not got a good structure. That should kind of be assumed if it's unknown. And do we need more dogs with unknown history, unknown temperaments, unknown health? No, we don't. In fact, having too many of these dogs is the major problem. And the best thing to do is to pay for a spay abortion. A lot of people don't do this because they think that, and it is smart, it makes sense financially, is you were too busy and lazy or whatever, forgetful. You didn't get the spay and neuter when you should have. Your dog got pregnant. If they have a litter, then you can use the income from selling them to spay and neuter your dog. That seems like it's so common, like it's probably the most common thing that is done with dogs for people who are underprivileged, just because spaying and neutering is that much more of a burden. It's several $100s, a couple $100s. Sometimes you can find programs where you can get them spayed and neutered for free or cheaply, more affordably, a couple $100, but it's viewed as optional in a certain culture. So this is the culture that we need to really focus on, where the problems are coming from. And so if in one sense you don't want people spaying and neutering prematurely, you want the dog to be able to mature sexually, but that also means that they have to have very good containment of that dog. They can't have a male and a female intact in the same home. That's just really poor planning and asking for pregnancy. If you do, you better have very secure kennels in place during the female's heat. But it's not a good idea, and it's really hard on dogs to go into heat. After their first heat, if you're not planning on breeding, that's when the spay should be done. So you just go through one of those, and it's really, really difficult, but you shouldn't want to go through those multiple times. If and since we don't need these dogs coming into the world, it's really like all the kids, there's just too many kids in the foster care system. If all the babies that were aborted were actually born and went into their foster care system, there wouldn't be enough money or homes. Like, they would be crowded into these orphanages, basically these group homes, and I mean crowded, just like we have animals crowded in the shelters. So abortion in that sense is actually kind of merciful. And abortion in the sense of euthanizing puppies before they're born, before they have to go through the entire just difficult life of being a dog born under those circumstances. Oftentimes they just don't get the best homes. And yes, there are people who will adopt these dogs and keep them for life, but it's just the minority, and it's not worth trying to focus on those to save a system that's in place that is failing completely. So I really think that there should be more spay aborts. The puppies just shouldn't enter the world if they weren't planned on. And I don't believe that you should spay and neuter all mixed dogs. Sometimes mixed dogs are much more genetically sound. They have less genetic diseases, less physical problems, and more steady temperaments than dogs that are too inbred, like with a breed. The whole way that they get the dog to reproduce that looks really similar to themselves is by inbreeding. Like, they're getting as close to clones as possible. The genetic material is like really, really similar. But when you do that, you not only are reproducing the good, you're also reproducing the bad. So if a bad mutation crops up, and bad mutations are cropping up all the time just spontaneously, you're breeding that into all of your dogs, and eventually you'll kind of discover that too late that you bred in some really bad genetics, and you're going to have to go back and kind of fix that problem. And a lot of dogs will have suffered in the meantime because of just lack of knowing. I don't know how you pull that up. Lack of knowing that this was going to happen, because there's very few of the genes that have been mapped and like they know have specific roles to play in certain genetic diseases. They're learning these genetics each day, like they learn more about them, and so eventually like more and more of the diseases will be eliminated through genetic testing and identifying and doing more selection, selecting away from these genes. But you can't do that blind. You have to know what the dog's genes are, both parents, and ideally many generations back. And so this cannot be done without a lot of planning and information. DNA testing is one of those sources of information that make it possible to produce quality dogs. So I believe if the genetics are not known, the temperament's not known, at least of both parents, if there's any iffy, temperament flaws, like dog aggression or human aggression, major separation anxiety, destructiveness, any health problems, like these dogs should not be born. More dogs should be aborted. Now, euthanasia is a very, very sensitive topic, but and I have personally dealt with dogs being euthanized senselessly. That was absolutely traumatic for me, and clients have put dogs down who I knew could be rehabilitated with enough training and could be managed for the rest of their life with much decreased risk of incidents in the future. But lack of money, lack of time, lack of confidence, makes basically seals the dog's fate. So that's hard for me. But I think I have a much more positive view of death than most people because I'm suicidal. Death is viewed as this idealistic lack of suffering. It's like, okay, your suffering ceases. That would be so wonderful because life is there's so much suffering in life. And so when someone's that suicidal, it means that there is definitely more pain in their life than enjoyment. And sometimes they go to extreme lengths to try to create more enjoyment in their life, and often use addictive substances or behaviors to try to fill that emptiness. And that's what I do with my animals. Being an animal addict, what was I saying? Wow, totally lost my train of thought. So yeah, I just cannot remember what I was saying at all. So I think I'm gonna close out this video. I apologize. I said everything I was wanting to say, and I'll probably have come back and kind of review what I was talking about. I know I was talking about spay abortions and how my view of death is more positive. So when a dog is euthanized, I don't think like, oh, that's so horrible for the dog, because the dog has just ceased to experience suffering. So I look at death as like actually a good thing. It's a release from suffering, which is a good thing. But a lot of people view it as like, oh, that's such a shame. Their life was cut short before it had to be. But what would their life have been like is the question. Would it have been a good, enjoyable, quality life? To me, like if a life doesn't have a certain degree of enjoyment and it has more suffering than enjoyment, then it's not worth living. But I think I have a higher standard of living. Like, I mean, I have a higher standard of what I think makes life worth living than most people. Like, I've talked to people who I feel like their life is pretty monotonous. My fiance included. Like, he wakes up, he goes to work, he works hard, he comes home, he goes to bed. There's just a lot of monotony to his life, and not a lot of like fulfillment. He doesn't get a lot of vacations or get to buy things that he enjoys or does think. He just has a very I guess to me it would definitely be considered unfulfilling. But he says he's happy, so some people they don't need as much to make them happy. And I think that any dog that you can look at them and they're like, oh, they're happy, if they're in the pound and they're fairly like happy, they're kind of wagging their tail and they just like the attention that they get when they get attention, but they're kind of contentedly just waiting. Okay, well, that dog still has a good quality of life. But if the dog looks depressed and anxious and or scared or sad, like if most of their life is dealing with that, from either just being neglected at home or going back to the pound, is that really worth it? I would say no. Like, it would not be a bad thing, in my opinion, for more of those dogs to just be humanely put to sleep. So yeah, I mean, I think that I have a little bit of a more positive view of euthanasia than some people. I don't believe that just because someone brought a dog into the world, that everyone is obligated to go far out of their way to make sure that dog lives. Because there is a point at which that is completely unsustainable. We haven't come to that point, but we sure are getting close, with a lot of the rescues being completely full and a lot of the pounds having to euthanize dogs just to make space. Like, they're not keeping all the dogs that come in and really assessing based on the temperament, and like only keeping the easy dogs on any given day. They might have put down an easy dog that would have been a really great pet, but the next day, like the easiest dog that they had room for was actually much harder than the one they put to sleep yesterday. So there's not a lot of like planning as far as which dogs get to live and which dogs get put down. Another issue is cities that are more crowded um, have more higher euthanasia rates. Or if someone chooses one pound over another pound, some pounds have higher euthanasia rates than others. So it's very like random. It's not just like, okay, only the very, very worst of the worst dogs are getting put down. Like, no, some of the very adoptable dogs are being put down. And sometimes the very aggressive dogs are kept for adoption because the particular pound that took it in is a no-kill one, so they keep their euthanasia rates really low and they only like euthanize the most aggressive. So there's a lot of things that come into play that make the situation a lot less fair in which dogs get to live and which dogs get put down. And I think it's really unfair to dog owners and the public to keep dogs around that the person adopting the dog has no intention to train. If there is someone who wants to adopt an aggressive dog, there should be a requirement that they sign up for a class. They should not be allowed to just adopt an aggressive dog or a dog with major anxiety or any of the issues that they have that really need training. That shouldn't be an option for them to adopt that dog and not train it. They should understand the true cost of owning that dog and giving it the best life. And if they cannot provide it, then they shouldn't be able to adopt it. And if no one can provide it, then maybe the dog should be put down, because what's the alternative? It's living in a home that neglects their needs for training, socialization, exercise, quality food, and that's not fair. So, all right, those are my thoughts for now.